nearly 4 decades, Stabroek News has been a fixture in Guyana's media landscape, documenting the nation's politics, amplifying public debate, and training generations of journalists. But today, the presses have fallen silent, marking the end of one of the country's longest-running independent newspapers. Today, we speak with Editor-in-Chief Anand Persaud about the legacy of Stabroek News, the battles it fought for independent journalism, and the realities that ultimately forced its closure after almost 40 years. From the newsroom's early days to its final edition, we reflect on the story behind the headlines and what this moment means for the future of journalism in Guyana. Welcome to Sources. I'm your host, Svetlana Marshall. Tonight, we'll be speaking with the Editor-in-Chief of Stabroek News, Mr. Anand Persaud. Mr. Persaud, welcome to Sources.
Thank you, Svetlana. It's my pleasure to be here.
Mr. Persaud, Stabroek News was established in 1986 by attorney at law and journalist, Mr. David de Caries. Tell me about the motive behind the establishment of Stabroek News back then.
Right. Okay. So he wasn't a journalist then. When he started up, he had been an attorney at law, and he was one of those people who had a hankering for the world of journalism and what they had been able to do. as it relates to sort of holding people accountable, opening up society, the fullest expression of human rights, and finding a way for the private sector to be the engine of economic growth. So I think he had this restless spirit after being for such a long period as an attorney, that he wanted to get into the area where a newspaper could be free-ranging and it could undertake some of the things that he and some of his close friends had been involved in terms of the New World magazine, which was his first venture into that sort of area. And he must have seen possibilities there, because New World was an important voice for a short period during the period when so many challenges were facing Guyana and the Caribbean. So I think that was the bug that bit him, and he found the opportunity in 1985 after elections were held and President Hoyt came to office. And I think he visited President Hoyt in the company of some others from the Caribbean, and he asked whether or not the president would be open to a newspaper being formed. And the president said yes. Maybe the president just said yes because he thought this would not go anywhere. People in this country don't understand how difficult it is to do things. But Mr. DeCaries took that yes, and he went off with it, went running with it, and everything else began to fall into place after. The rest of it is history, as they usually say. And the newspaper had its inaugural complimentary edition in November 1986, and then proceeded in stages towards moving up to a full daily in 1994.
You joined 3 years after in
Yes.
1989.
Yes.
Take us back to your first days at Stabroek News. What do you
Yes.
remember most about walking into that newsroom for the very first time?
Sure. I remember just as if it was yesterday, my first day going there, and I had to take a writing test because everybody who was applying there, you needed to show that you could, write in some way or the other. So I took a writing test, and I submitted that to Mrs. DeCaries, who was the general manager at that stage, and then I got a call back to return for a second interview, and I saw her, and then she sent me upstairs. We have a very interesting building on Robb Street. It was a 3-story, it was 2 stories, and then there was a very narrow stair walking up to a sort of a very small tower-like structure at the top, which is where his office was. And I remember walking in that day, and he said, well, yeah, the Berlin Wall is coming down. And he was telling me all kinds of things that were going on. He said, well, I've seen your test, and, I'll give you a job, and, you start off on 3 months probation. And then I started off on 3 months probation. And thereafter, it was, the usual grind. And the thing that stands out, of course, is, and of course, people of your generation and people of today will not understand what journalists of that period went through. We had to work with typewriters.
Wow.
I had never used a typewriter in my life up to that stage, because typewriters were really sort of old style and old fashioned. But then a typewriter was in front of you, you had to reel in newsprint, and then you had to begin typing if you were doing a story and so on. So what is a lasting memory there is you have to type, and then you have to use whiteout to correct things and so on. In this day and age, you can simply just erase on your computer and use your backspace to delete and so on. So having to work within that framework was very interesting and exciting when you compare it to what happens today. So those days were a lot of hard work. We were only printing, I think, 3 times a week when I started, and but the grind was the same, because you have to work on a series of stories, and you have to sort of make sure you begin sort of like working on the foundation blocks of the business. And I was on 3 months probation, like I told you, and for the 3 months I was given assignments, and I wasn't sure how well I was doing. Some things would be published, and you'd say one thing or the other.
Would you get a byline then?
No.
No?
I'll come to the byline later. So I wasn't really sure how it was I was doing, but one day, people say I have big ears, and I have legendary big ears, and I overheard him telling my boss, this chap went down the line. He went to everybody he was supposed to go to. And from that day onwards, it struck me, and which is something that journalists must take to heart. That is, he'd given me a story to do with First Federation Life, which is a building now on Cold Street that is sunk, where all of these law offices were. It was an insurance company that had gone bust, and a lot of money was outstanding to its insured and other people. and it required me to go to 3 or 4 different offices to find out what was happening. So he was glad that I had done that, and I had internalized in my mind that this is something that you needed to do to get the whole story. But even in those days, doors were closed and shut on you when you went and asked things, but you have to persevere. Even if you know a door is going to be shut in your face, you still have to go to do it, because that's what's getting you the story that you need. So from that day onwards, I said, I think I'm going to be kept in whatever it is. And I was kept, and
You're here 37 years after.
The other thing about bylines, though, and this is something that is also something that journalists today should take to heart, that is, a byline was really only given to you after you earned it. That is, your work was exemplary, you stood out, and you really put a lot of work into it. And it took me years before I got a byline.
Wow.
People in the business come in, and every day they expect on the first day that they're going to have it. And looking back at it, I understand why I really didn't have it before then, because he was holding us to a very high standard, and a standard that really should apply today in all places and so on. So I remember that I eventually got my first byline when the report on the barge commission inquiry, there was a big inquiry into the purchase of a barge that had a lot of corruption and other matters associated with it. And when the report came out, he gave me the report to do, and it took a lot of digesting and a lot of background work on it, and I ended up getting a byline for that, but that was several years after I joined.
Mm-hmm. What was your interest, your field of interest back then?
Oh, well, my field of interest was what he catapulted me into, and then it became something that, it just so happened that I really liked it. On the very first week I was there, he said, okay, you're going to go to a United Republican Party press conference, and I said, oh, fine. In those days, maybe not as much as you find today, there was a diversity and variety of small parties trying to sort of like to find their way into the political sphere. And all of these parties had at some stage or the other established with the expectation that if elections were held, that they were going to get into a good position to get into office. So all of these small parties were holding regular press conferences and so on, and so that he would tell me to go and listen to what they had to say and so on. Of course, I was a novice. I had not done press conferences, so I had to go and I had to listen and then try to ask questions and then write a story, and then, that's how it would go. And there were about 7 or 8 parties that eventually came to be called the Patriotic Coalition for Democracy, which was the main alliance group which was advocating for free and fair elections. The PPP was the major party in it. So for the couple of years before that election, I used to be crisscrossing the road down to all of the different parties. Freedom House was up the road. I would go to United Force that Mr. Nadir was in charge of. I would go to Cole Street and back and forth on foot, because in those days we didn't have our own transportation. So quite a lot of the things had to be done on foot, and we walk around. So I ended up becoming a political correspondent and doing parliamentary work, and I liked it.
Nice.
And when you like it, it makes it a lot easier. For you to do what it is you have to do.
Who were your mentors back then, and how did they shape you and influence the work? So the first person who really sort of helped us to understand what we had to do was Mr. Sharif Khan, who was the news editor at that stage. He was working under Mr. Carey's. He had been a journalist who had had training with the BBC. He'd worked at GBC, and he'd worked at the Chronicle and other places. So he, of course, had the experience. So he did sort of drill into us the basics, writing a short, snappy opening paragraph, making sure you check and vet your sources. That is, if you are ever in doubt, you should only be able to carry a story if you have 2 sources who are different people. That's the sort of standard test before you go with anything. So he sort of like inculcated the fundamentals in all of us, and we're very grateful for that. Mr. De Carey's was also learning along the same pathway that we were. We did have people who would come down from newspapers in the UK, and there was a Commonwealth Press Union that would have persons sent down, because, like I said, Mr. De Carey's was not a trained journalist. So he was also learning with us at the same time that quite a lot of the training was ongoing. So that was all kind of interesting, because it sort of showed the beginnings of the newspaper. It was not the sort of like formalistic thing you would find in other places. It was trying to come to terms with what it had to do in a very difficult environment, because for the first couple of years, not when I arrived, but for
for the first couple of years, the newspaper had to be taken to Trinidad to be printed. So the flats and everything had to be transported to Trinidad. Mrs. De Curies had to take it there. They would be printed, and then she would bring all the copies back on the plane for distribution, whichever day it was going to be done. So it was a very exciting period for the newspaper's development, considering that it was only the state media you had there at that time, the Chronicle, and at that stage you had no electronic media. So all of the proliferation of TV channels and radio channels and so on, nothing else was there. It was Chronicle, us, a very slim paper from the Mirror, and the Catholic Standard. And so it was a very sort of like limited arena.
Why the newspaper had to be printed in Trinidad?
Because we didn't have our own press then.
Okay.
So when we started up with a little bit of seed funding, and we didn't have a press at that stage. So we had to go to Trinidad to print there. Eventually, we were able to get one, and then later, and I think that's why we will end up being, when you examine us, a model company in many different ways. We did eventually take a significant loan, a US $1 million loan from what was then the National Bank of Industry and Commerce, to purchase a press. It was a reconditioned press, and we bought it, and that's located at our George Street establishment. And so that required us to make, of course, significant debt repayments over the period. And we did that, and we made sure we paid off before the loan was due and so on. So again, that showed a small company being able to take a significant loan to buy something that was important to its operations and being able to have the discharge all of its financial obligations. So that, I think, was a very important thing in the ambit of what was happening here.
Now, journalism also has its difficult days.
Yes.
What were the lowest moments for you personally during your time, over those 37 years?
Yeah, I would say definitely what would be the low points. But there were high points in the sense that you get a lot of satisfaction for what it is you have to do. I think if you look at periods like where you felt that your work was under severe threat and that you were going into reversion rather than progressing, I'll point to the attempt to rig the elections in 2020 because, like I said, when we started in 1986, one of our main thrusts at that stage was the campaign for free and fair elections. So we were able to get over that hurdle in 1992, and we returned to free and fair elections. And thereafter, we did have elections that had a fair amount of trouble with unrest in the streets. We had the Herd-Manson Accord that abridged Mrs. Jagan's term. We did have a lot of electoral difficulties. But what happened in 2020 was sort of very destructive and disastrous. What we were doing was going back to 1992 and all of the turmoil that was going on there. That is a naked attempt to rig the election. So you begin to think, was all of your work worth it? Mm-hmm. That is, everything that you've done to sort of like to help the country to sort of get to the stage of democratic elections and then progressing from there rather than having to face again a 5-month campaign before the results could be declared. So those were difficult times, but at the end of it, you feel exhilaration because you felt that you were part of something that was able to you were able to win in the end. You were able to win against people who were trying to overturn the decision. So I think all low points in journalism eventually rise to a higher point when you look back at the effort that was made and how you were able to sort of like to turn it in the favor of the public interest. The other low point, one of the other low points would have been, of course, the prison break from 2002.
Yeah.
I don't think you were working in the business then, but
no.
In 2002, when that occurred, and every day journalists who've had an association with the newspaper would reflect on it, that was an extremely difficult period. And from day to day, you can look back on it. And, we did a very important compendium on all the deaths that occurred during that period.
We'll definitely get to that.
Okay, and we recently published something on that. But the reporters can tell you, and even some of them who are still attached to the newspaper will tell you of having to dive for cover on the ground during a shootout that claimed 4 or 5 lives and trying to figure whether or not they were going to get out of this thing alive. Now, when you have that sort of thing, when you know you have to send journalists out into harm's way, and when you have to face the possibility that you're not going to be able to sort of get a story because of the difficult conditions that they have to sort of endure, those were very difficult periods. But when you look back at it, you say, no, this was important for journalism and being able to show people the carnage that was occurring on a daily basis, and how you help to bring that information to people, no matter the challenges. So I think it comes back, it redounds to the importance of this profession and ensuring that you can do it. And one other one, which of course I'm sure people more recently remember, was during the pandemic, because during the pandemic we worked every single day. That is, there was no laying off of anybody. We tried to make sure that everybody was fully sanitized. They had all of the items they needed to make sure they can operate safely, masking and everything. And we worked every single day, and we just made sure that we were present, because that was also an important area. So it may seem as a low point then, having to sort of like to go through all of the trials and tribulations, but it ends up being a triumph, because you were able to do this in the interest of the public.
And safely executed.
Yes.
I was going to ask about the pandemic, because I know that the 2020 elections, just as the elections were held here in Guyana, the pandemic came.
Right.
We started experiencing the first case, and then cases started increasing. So it was extremely challenging to be on the ground. But journalists were out there providing coverage. Now, just in case you've just joined us, this is Sources, and we're speaking with the Editor-in-Chief of Stabroek News. Mr. Persaud, Stabroek News has been described as a pillar of independent journalism in Guyana. In your view, what was the newspaper's most important contribution to the country's democratic development over the last 4 decades?
Yeah, so I think one thing that we need to point out here is that when we came into office, we said we will be performing non-advocacy reporting. That is, we are not supporting a party one way or the other, because this country was heavily polarized then. It's still heavily polarized today. It is fully divided into 2 or 3 little camps, and everybody is fully wedded to what they believe, either the governing party or the opposition. So we said we did not want to contribute to that. So I think one of the important things that we brought to the table was that we were going to be presenting things in an independent way. That is, taking everybody's position and trying to present it to the public so that the public can make the decision on whether or not what one party was doing and what the other party was doing, whether or not that was correct. So I think that's one of the important things that we did. We did not advocate for one party or the other. I think the crucial thing, though, that people always come back to is that our pages allowed people to be able to speak and to ventilate about anything that they had concerns about. When we came on the scene in 1986, like I said, the society was very closed, but our letter columns became extremely popular, and they are popular today. That is, some days we have to run 4 or 5 pages of letters. We have more letters on a daily basis than we can carry. And the most important letters are the ones that relate to people's ordinary grouses or problems. We have been a forum that people write and say, I haven't gotten my NIS benefits because even though I sent in my contributions, I've been rejected and so on. And routinely what happens, once your complaints and letters appear in the letter columns, they're taken up by whichever agency, as they should be. You may find some governments are not as responsive, and that's something that we can talk about later. But I think one of the things that our letter pages have done over the period and continue to do is to allow people to see themselves in the newspaper and to have discussions created. They may ventilate what they want to say about things, and it may end there, but it oftentimes leads to a lot of discussion. So we've allowed that to also build. And I think more than that, what we've done is to show that we treat all of the subjects that appear before us in a fair way, always trying to present a balanced view of how the journalist should sort of communicate a story. And I think that's one of our lasting records. That's one of the lasting legacies that we'll have here, that people see, no matter how they criticize you and no matter how they may disagree with you, they feel that we're giving them a fair shake and that we're trying to ensure that all sides of the story are captured. And I think that's really what should be the thing that underpins journalism in this country.
Largely, Stabroek News is known as an independent newspaper, but of course there's government, or whichever government in office, from time to time label Stabroek News, your opposition person, try to put you in a bracket. How do you deal with such?
Yeah, and this is something that we we have addressed from day one. From even when we were founded in 1986, the then government of President Hoyt was not very receptive to us trying to push for free and fair elections. And there was this one famous case where Mr. Hoyt went up to Lyndon and described us in very unflattering terms, using what would be seen to be a race epithet. So this is something, once you're a journalist, you become very attuned to very quickly. The minute a government is in office, they're going to label you as part of the opposition, and they're going to come after you. Shut that out of your mindset completely, because it will be distracting to you. You just simply have to focus on what it is you're doing. You know that you're trying to be balanced. You know you're trying to give everybody a fair shake. So we've had that entirely going through our, this period. And just to take maybe your listeners through how quickly things can turn. In 2020, when the PPP could not get into office, even though they had won the election, the people who sort of helped them get over that hurdle were people like us in civil society, people like the free media, people like civil society organizations that petitioned places and wrote letters and made appeals to international agencies about the rigging of the elections. The international community helped greatly to enable the government to take office. And now what it has done over that period is then to simply do what governments do. It has targeted Stabroek News, it has targeted other parts of civil society. It has said that the newspaper and other groups are just out to get them. Whereas they should have been grateful for all of the work that we did to get them in and to show their recognition of the importance of the free press and civil society groups that have been campaigning for higher standards and so on. And so we are leaving office with this dreadful record of the government not having paid us $85 million for goods and for services that we've provided them. And it shows, a very sort of backward thinking on their part, because civil society is extremely important, but they have turned their back on it simply because they were able to get in on the election and they have access now to all of this fantastic stream of oil revenues. But unfortunately, they have to recognize that civil society is an extremely important part of the entire fabric of society, and that they must recognize that. And so the labeling about pro-government or anti-government is not important, and it mustn't distract independent media and other groups from doing what they really have to do.
Mm-hmm. Now, Stabroek News, in a sense, has campaigned for local government elections, which at the time was not held for more than 20 years.
Yes.
And of course, we know that in 2016, the then government held local government elections for the first time after decades. What pushed Stabroek News to take up, this mantle to say, what, we're going to publish stories, we're going to put it on our front page that we're calling for local government elections to be held?
Right. So that again is another example of where newspapers can use their pages to advocate for things that are important. And this came up during the Ramatara administration. So this would have been after 2011. And really what we need to look at here was what was happening at local government. It was disgraceful that the last local government election we'd had, up to the point that we had begun this campaign, was in 1994. Yeah. So you can just imagine if you went from 1994 and you go up to 2011, and you don't have local government elections, and what you have is governments postponing, no, not 1996, not 1997, not 1998, not 1999, and finding excuses, and you can find your way up to 2011 without holding elections. That's terrible. And why it is, it's something that the newspaper took up is we have, for the most part, gone very often into local communities. We could see the depredations and the breakdowns in local communities. We inaugurated what we had called our first window in Guyana, which is we had begun visits to all parts of the country. So every week we visited a different part of the country at quite considerable cost, because travel in the interior is not inexpensive. And then that morphed later on into something called the World Beyond Georgetown, where every single week we went into a different community. So when you go into these communities, you can see how they're suffering from the lack of local government. That is, they don't have good roads, they don't have garbage collection, there are weeds in the trenches, their healthcare facilities are in a poor way. So we recognize the importance of doing a campaign like that. And so we decided to run on our front page, that is, call local government elections. We had an essay competition, we did various things and so on, and there was a lot of pressure on the Ramachar administration. It also saw the international community also taking up that thing about insisting that local government elections be held. Of course, they did not hold local government elections. They found a way to continue to deny, and the Ramachar administration came to an end without local government elections. Then when APNU plus AFC came in, we didn't have one in 2016, and I hope that that pattern will continue because we're due to have one at the end of this year, and I hope nothing gets into the way of it being held on time.
The other thing is that you personally joined other civil society members on the picket line, picketing the Office of the Commissioner of Information. Why? Because there's need for access to information, and journalists have not been able to access information through his office. Why go? Why take that stand? Why go out there? You know, sometimes you could have sent your journalists.
Yes, yeah.
You know, but you.
Sure. But I think sometimes you need to get out of the office and do some of the work that the journalists do. So, so newspapers have to, especially independent newspapers, have to think carefully about which topics they personally advocate for. So I will say the first time I entered a protest line, it was a very important thing. This is in 2007. When the Jagdeo administration had cut off ads to the newspaper for 17 months. And we held a protest outside of the CARICOM Secretariat where a meeting was being held by, it was a Commonwealth meeting, and we protested because this is something that was important to us. This was our livelihood, this is our lifeblood. This is our right to access state advertising, so we protested then. So that was our first protest. I decided to join that protest in relation to the Commission of Information because information is the lifeblood of journalism. And so journalists, I think, have to take a stand on that. So when there was a mobilization in relation to protesting against the Commissioner of Information's refusal to do what he's supposed to do, submit reports to Parliament, I decided to join. So I attended 6 pickets, and I was very glad to do that. I was unable to attend the 7th because that was the same day we were announcing the closure of the newspaper, but I would have gone to that because it's a very important thing to the profession of journalism. It makes no sense to have access to information legislation if your intention is just to have it not function. And that's what I'm accusing the government of here, is that they have access to information legislation and their intention is to have it not function, and which is why they've turned a blind eye and had the gall in the last Parliament sitting to throw their hands up in the air and say, well, what do you want us to do if he's not delivering his things? This is exactly what you want. You're allowing it to go that way because if you were serious about access to information, you would have taken action. You would not have been giving money to people and not seeing the results. So I think the government is to be blamed for that, and the fact that they haven't been responsive, even though we protested twice outside President Ali's office, tells me that they're not interested in a functioning and a properly run access to information legislation and a Commission of Information.
How does the lack of access to information affect the work of journalists and not being able to get critical information maybe on projects or programs being executed at millions of dollars, but also residents and citizens of the country, taxpayers' dollars? Yeah.
And so we should be a free and open society, which is what, like I said, was one of the founding principles of the newspaper. And while the government may like to give you things that they want to give, there are things they withhold. And a prime example of that would be the report on the helicopter crash, where a number of senior GDF people died.
Right.
And even though they had promised that this report was going to be made available, it hasn't been made available. And they've changed from one story to the next. They're now saying it's classified information, but there are ways that reports like that could be sanitized, and elements that should be dangerous could be removed. But their intention is not to provide that. So here, where you don't have the ability to get it from the government or the agency that is responsible, you then should be able to go to the Commission of Information. And so this is what we're arguing about, that is, where there's information that has been withheld by the government, there is an obligation for the access to information legislation to work and for the Commission of Information to provide that. He's not providing this. And he's coming up with all kinds of quaint and strange answers to people. We will have a letter in tomorrow's edition where there is another attempt to have him supply information on the investigation into the rape allegations against Mr. Daramal. And there's going to be a letter again explaining how the Commission of Information is not providing. So it seems to me that unless you keep pressing, you're not going to be able to get what it is you have to get, because the government will withhold information on things it doesn't want you to see. And if you had an independent and functioning Office of the Commission of Information, we would be better off. So this is something that journalists need to sort of mobilize over and to agitate for, and that's why I participated.
Earlier you spoke about the 2002 jailbreak. Now, over the years, Stabroek News has investigated major issues surrounding that jailbreak, the events, the crime wave that unfolded following that jailbreak. And that was just one investigation. You've also had the Gold Scholarship Program, an investigative piece on that. How did these investigations challenge the status quo and influence change?
Right.
We could start with the jailbreak.
Right. So the jailbreak, one of the main things that we wanted to ensure that we did a full investigative piece on this was that after the jailbreak, what began to happen was that there was this story going around that over the period of, let's say, 2002 to 2006 or 2007, that hundreds of men of Afro-Guyanese heritage had been killed or had disappeared or had died under unknown circumstances. Now, it is a very delicate thing in a country of this sort, as you could understand.
Yeah.
Two major races, polarization of the country along political lines. So we thought that that was extremely important to study. That is, it required a careful study of every single death that had occurred over that period. So because we knew that this thing had now become something that had gotten into the local story about how many hundreds of people were supposedly killed, we thought it was our public duty and obligation to try to figure out what had happened here. And so we went back painstakingly over our records and other records to determine exactly how many people had died, under what circumstances, and whether or not it could be categorized as a police killing, as an extrajudicial killing, or a killing related to some crime that had occurred. And we were able then to compile that, and I think the first day it appeared, people were in amazement that they now saw some factual basis. Our basis could still be challenged. People might say, oh, you missed these or you missed that. And actually, after we published, some people did come forward and say we missed a couple, and we did, and then we corrected it in a second. But the broader picture was there. That is, in the main, what had happened was there wasn't any more a story about hundreds. It might have been maybe dozens, or it might have been whatever it is. But what we were able to see was the balance between the people who were killed by the rampaging bandits who suffered and who were killed as a result of what they were doing. And there was a segment of unexplained killings. And of course, those killings might have been attributed to the alleged operation of death squads during that period. So that again allowed, the ability to be able to sort of see where we needed to sort of do further investigation at the level of the state, at the level of parliament. There should be an investigation over what happened during that period. Were they death squads? Who authorized them? Are they people who should be held accountable today for that? So those are things that still need to be challenged, and they can be investigated as far as journalists can go, but there is still a lot that needs to be examined at the level of the state and the level of parliament, and that's something that we thought we're very proud of. There's a lot of important work that went in, and we did last year publish the second installment, and that there is a repository of information that researchers and other people in the future could use as background for further examinations and perfect and detract from, whatever it is. Because one of the things about this business is the proof of the pudding is always in the eating. So we may have a certain narrative, but you can go and then go back and do maybe a more detailed investigation. You might find other ways of doing this. But we've done our job there, and it's now for people to sort of take that information and figure whether or not we had done the right thing and whether or not what we have is correct.
Would a commission of inquiry help? I know in the past we had several inquiries.
We have called for a commission of inquiry into that. And, the government has been told umpteen times. I think even when President Granger was in office, he had said at the start that he was going to do this, but then it didn't happen. And so, I think you'd have to ask, why is it that, governments would be indisposed to holding a commission inquiry, considering the numbers of people that died, considering the extent of the threat to the state. A sitting government minister was murdered, and that has never really been investigated. That is, nobody knows for sure what happened there. There were 3 massacres separate during that period, one at Lusitania, one at Bartica, and one at Lindo Creek. And those have not been satisfactorily and completely investigated. So there's a lot of more work to do there.
Well, we had the Lindo Creek COI, but again,
not to the conclusion of all of the questions that remained outstanding.
Another important feature, a fixture, I should say, in the Stabroek News was that of the cost of living. How is cost of living affecting Guyanese, regular Guyanese? Oftentimes we hear a lot from the politicians. Every day they get featured in the newspaper. You've taken it, Stabroek News, taken a decision to publish regular citizens telling us, telling this nation and the world at large how cost of living is affecting them. Tell me more about that initiative.
So we're ending with 171 weeks. This is more than 3 years of work. That is, week in, week out, we go to communities and speak. And our last one, we decided to go to Lethem, because we hadn't done Lethem, and we decided we want to round off at Lethem. And it isn't cheap to go to Lethem, so we went there and we did that and so on. So what propelled us to do this was that when we started it, we had just gotten into the stream of oil revenues. And the standard cry from people on the ground and in the grassroots would be, okay, we have oil and so on, but here my situation is difficult. I'm living in dire circumstances and so on. So we wanted to see how, with the progression of the oil extraction and the sinking of that money into the economy, whether or not it was really alleviating poverty. So one week we decided, we were going to try and ask. And I was a bit skeptical, because Guyanese are notorious for saying, don't put me on camera, I don't really want my name there, and whatever it is, and so on and so forth.
Just take my voice.
You got to cajole them, they don't want to be there, and whatever it is. So I was saying it might not go anywhere. So I sent out the reporter. The reporter that has done the majority, I think, save for 2 or 3 of them, is Subhana Shumangal, and she should be recognized for the work that she's done. She obviously has a way with convincing people to be on camera and to have their names go. So we had sent her out, and I said I was not very optimistic about what the returns would be. But when she came back and I saw her copy, I was astounded. People were quite prepared to say, well, I'm not sure that I can be able to have more than 2 meals today, because this cost of living thing is a dreadful thing. So I cut down on chicken. I only use chicken once a week. And I have a disabled child here. I don't have any person to keep him. It's an added expense, and I haven't been able to start to get it. I have a sick parent. I don't have money to transport her. And on top of that, I'm out of a job. And I don't have income. I have to rely on family from overseas and so on. So over those 10 interviews for the first one, you saw a wide variety of people saying things from different classes, but essentially the same message. We're struggling. And good luck to the people who are getting the oil, because we're not really seeing it. But we would like some of that, right? And hopefully it's going to be improving. And that just set us off on this path. So we decided we'll try our luck again, try again the next week, and try again the next week. And we went all over. And everywhere she went, she was able to get people who would go into the nitty-gritty. That is, I only think I can afford 1 meal today, and I've cut out beef from my diet because it's so expensive. And they're telling you, with the greatest honesty and in live and full detail. And it's something that I had never really experienced, that people would be so forthright. But I think what sort of galvanized them is the fact that they could see all of this massive building construction and the talk about the spending and who is going to be the new Dubai and so on, but they are not seeing it. So their thing is, no, well, we're not seeing this. We would like to see it. And people need to be doing something about our needs. That is, you either have to give us some sort of a cash grant, or you need to find a way to give us some sort of transportation subsidy, but pay attention to us, because nobody is doing that. And that all the talk that they're seeing is, or hearing, is about, where Guyana is going and where this massive construction is taking them. But at the bottom, the grassroots continues to punish and the government is not listening carefully enough. And they certainly should be taking clear account of what we've been reporting over those periods. They really should have their ministers go back to all of those communities that are responsible for and see what it is they can do by identifying these pockets of severe poverty. So we're extremely proud of that work that we've done. Hopefully it could be continued by others because there's great need for that.
Mr. Persaud, let's switch gear a bit and talk about the people behind the newspaper. Many journalists across Guyana say their careers began at Stabroek News. What do you consider the greatest products of Stabroek News, whether it's people, ideas, or public debates that help shape?
Yeah, well, definitely it's the public debate that we help to shape. You know, that's one of the other things that we don't mention often. People say the Stabroek News has been a training ground for so many journalists. A lot of people have come, they've begun learning about the ropes of the business, and I think what makes them very saleable and marketable is that they understand the sort of like the nitty-gritty here, the nuts and bolts. That is, you have to be trustworthy, you have to make sure you don't go out of your way to sort of like engage in sensationalism. You have to ensure that you are dealing with the truth. You have to ensure that you're trying to confirm facts, basic details like spellings of people's names and so forth, really the nuts and bolts of the business. And I think once people know that you've worked with Stabroek News, they know Stabroek News carries a certain image. And so that a lot of people have come through our doors. And so that's one of the things we don't talk about, but I think we've contributed to the training of a cadre of journalists over a long period of time. And we're proud that they're continuing working in other places, and we're glad about that. So I think that's one of our major contributions to, you know, the landscape and what we've done. But I think overall, it's the debate that we opened up and allowing people to understand what was happening on a daily basis. Because before television arrived, before, you know, this mushrooming on the electronic spectrum, people used to rush to collect their newspaper the next day to see what was happening. And, you know, and that they started their day with us. And it became even better when we went online, because they could then see us live at maybe 3 or 4 in the morning. And during the day, they can also get updates and so on. So, you know, we tried our best to sort of capture that wave too, and we did participate in it. We did have a very firm presence online and so on. So I think, you know, those are also major contributions to, you know, the whole process.
For nearly 40 years, the newspaper has asked difficult questions of those in power. Did you ever feel the weight or the risk of that responsibility?
Sure. You know, every time you ask a question, you don't know what's coming at you. It could be an insult, it could be, you know, sort of like, get out from here, and, you know, that's happened, and don't come back, and, you know, hang up the phone, and so on. And we get that often. You call somebody and ask them a question, they slam the phone on you, and so on. So, but nothing ventured, nothing gained. You have to ask the questions. And, you know, though I myself wasn't a reporter for as long as I would have liked to have been, because I then went into the editorship of the newspaper and so on, I do remember my first couple of years here, and, you know, the importance of question asking is something that is an art, and it's something that you need to sort of like to finesse, but it's what is going to lead you to the gold mine that you were looking for. And I remember one question in particular before 1992 at a PNC press conference, because it was PNC then, when President Hoyt was out of the country, and there was talk that there might be a challenge to President Hoyt because people in his party were not very happy with the reformist trend that he seemed to have been taking. So there was a PNC press conference, and I asked the then Prime Minister, Hamilton Green, whether he intended to challenge Mr. Hoyt for leadership of the party. And he paused for a while and he said, well, I haven't made my mind up as yet, but that was enough. The fact that he said he hadn't decided as yet set in train a whole series of things. He was then expelled from the party. He then formed the Good and Green Guyana, which contested at municipal elections and ended up winning the city. He ended up winning the city. But that one particular question sort of triggered a series of things that you never would have known, but in a way it sort of underlined the shake-up, the democratic shake-up that was necessary. So questions do produce answers. And I remember another that saved the country money. It was when the sale of Demerara Woods Limited was being concluded. There was a press conference on that, and usually journalists were told to get the basic facts. So I asked, what is the sale price here? And the sale price was disclosed at that press conference. But had it not been disclosed at a press conference, there had been an attempt to reduce it behind the scenes, but it wasn't possible because it had then gone public. So this is why journalists have to make sure that they get the very basics out, because those things end up sort of becoming a marker that can't really be turned back. So it's very important in that sense. So, questions are the lifeblood of the business, and you have to be bold enough to ask them no matter what. As you yourself would know, like when you were asking President Ali, but you have to do it. And that's really what, it takes that sort of courage, and it takes that sort of preparation. You really have to do your work before you go and turn up and ask. So you don't put yourself on the back foot by the person saying, no, you have the wrong information. You need to be able to say, no, I am right, and I'm asking you about this because this happened yesterday, and I can quote this to you.
Yeah. Now let's turn our attention to the decision by Stabroek News to close shop.
Yes.
Now this is a hard topic because when the announcement was made, I started crying.
Oh, no.
Like,
oh God. I'm sorry we brought you to tears.
My sister was like, Svetlana, but you worked at Stabroek News. And I was like, no, it's about the institution.
Yes.
And for many and thousands,
yes.
it's about the institution and the contributions made.
Yes.
Right? Mr. Persaud, when did you realize that the survival of Stabroek News was truly under threat? And what were the conversations like inside the newsroom as that reality began to sink in?
Right. So I'm going to be guided by, what the shareholders have said, because the major shareholders are the ones who made the final decision to close. And we are going to be having a meeting on Friday for the shareholders where the final liquidation decision is going to be taken. So I would say over the last year and a half, it had become clear internally. And because I'm in a senior position, I was aware of those things. So it was really a question of when we might come to an end and what the end would be like, So we did discuss various things at the level of the board, at the level of the shareholders. We did discuss maybe printing only a few times a week, maybe just going online, just having a digital version. And so those were discussions that were going on. So it's pretty difficult to be running a newspaper on a daily basis with that at the back of your mind, because it's a tremendous burden.
Yeah.
But that's really where we come at this stage, because as everybody would know, and your viewers would know, newspaper industries all over the world are facing the same problem, because you're losing your two main streams of revenue. You're losing newspaper subscribers, and you're losing advertisers. And if you look at our newspapers today, you will see major advertisers like Courts, Banks CIH, Digicel, GTT, and so on, they've migrated to online platforms more or less. And so you had to confront the reality that by the loss of those revenue streams, what was happening is your independence is under threat. This is what we safeguarded for 40 years. That is, we were able to make our own way with our revenue streams, with the support from the public, with support from the advertisers, and that enabled our independent viewpoint. We're now at the risk here of not being able to make our way. And what ultimately happens there is that people then come and say, no, we don't want you to go in this direction, we want you to go in that direction, and so on, and we're not prepared for that. So our position is we're leaving on our own terms, on our own feet, not beholden to anybody, and being able to take care of all of our obligations in a way that is according to our practices and what we expect. I will, your readers, your viewers may know that in Trinidad, their third newspaper, their Newsday, closed down, and they've closed down in a heap. That is, they stopped printing one day without any word to the staff, and Liquidator now has to decide whether or not there is going to be resources available to reporters who are there and other staff and so on. We've done it entirely differently. We thought it was important to give people a month's notice so they can begin to come to terms with what was happening, and that they can grieve and mourn in their own way. And we are ensuring, and we have ensured, even though the government has this money outstanding for us, that we will pay everything that has to be paid, including the portion of the month that has to be paid, and all of the benefits that are due to workers will be paid before the newspaper winds up. So it was a very difficult thing, and more so difficult because we know that the mission that we set out on is not over, right? We did our part for nearly 40 years, but the mission is not over. Accountability is something that is required on a daily basis. And I would have loved to continue that, But unfortunately for the shareholders in the company, it's the end.
Just when you spoke about how the collapse of print advertising and them migrating to digital platforms like Facebook and YouTube and TikTok now, but do you think it's solely as a result of that technology, or there were other forces that resulted in the closure?
It's definitely the technology. I mean, it's all migrated there. So everything is on the handset. I mean, the young people these days, and I think that's really one of the other things that older media and newspapers have faced. That is, young people have no sense at all of newspapers. That is, they are so fully sort of like in tune in this world on the handset. They're not going to go and consult a newspaper. They're going to consult maybe online sources of information, and they're spoiled for choice. That is, there are a lot of freely available sites, and they can do this on a regular basis. So what newspapers over time like ours have suffered is they've suffered a loss of their subscriber base. Your readers are older people who become accustomed to newspapers. Those people are dying out, migrating, or they're no longer here. And the younger readers are not buying you. So you face a future that is quite different. And when your advertisers also leave you, well, then there's nothing left. In 2007, we had gone behind a paywall online for a third stream of revenue. And that did help us, tide ourselves over the period. And, so we had gone for as long as we could. There is no part of the newspaper business that was ever easy. It's been 40 years of hard grind. Some years are better than others, but no year was ever that easy that you can just say, yeah, we're on easy street and, we can be rolling in dough and so on. The newspaper business is narrow margins, high cost of newsprint, and then you have the daily overheads, you have employment costs, and employment costs is also something that has come up recently as it relates to the state. The state is now the major employer of a lot of people. The state and oil companies and their subsidiaries, they are paying and are able to pay far better than entities like Stabroek News and others. So you find a lot of people leaving hard work journalism to go into public relations and things that have to do with just rewriting media releases and so on. So there is a shake-up then that is still facing, I think, the media industry.
Now, the company has said that it lost money for 6 of the last 10 years. Looking back, do you believe that there were strategies that could have saved the newspaper?
Right. So, we've cut corners as best as we could. So 6 of those years, there would have been 2 really were in losses. I mean, maybe the rest might have been break even. So we were still doing break even and just a major loss last year and so on. And we have tried everything that we could over the period, including, of course, trying to have a digital replica of everything that we were doing. And, we do have click revenue. We do have revenue from subscribers online. So we didn't only have newsprint subscribers. We had digital subscribers, hundreds of them, plus the click revenue. So we did try all of those things. At our height, we did have about 110 employees. And eventually, over time, through trying to cost cut and through attrition, we came down to about 6 employees. But one of the things that we're very proud of is we've never, until we got to this stage, we never laid off an employee in the interest of saving money. What we did was rerouted people, redirected them to other parts of the newspaper. So we have this standing of never having laid off. But we did try everything we could possibly do over that period without undermining the kind of principles that we stood for. We didn't want to adulterate that. So there isn't anything else that we thought that we could have done outside of undermining where it was we stood. And we battled our way through so many different crises, and we feel gratified that we were able to do that. But I think, unfortunately, there's no other way for us at this stage.
Earlier you spoke about $85 million outstanding in government owing Stabroek News $85 million. To what extent did political and financial pressure affect the survival of Stabroek News?
Right. Well, when we really came under political pressure and under threat, I think would have been in 2007. It was clear that in 2007, the Jagdeo administration's intention was to shut us down because he and there had already been plans in place to have a new newspaper start up, the Guyana Times, and they started up quite around then. So why, again, that might have happened was in 2006 when the election was held. In the period that preceded 2006, we had opened up our columns to this new party that was on the scene then, the Alliance for Change. We had given regular columns to its two main figures, Raphael Trotman and Kemraj Ramjatan. And when the elections were held in 2006, they ended up with 5 seats. It was a stunning result for a third party in the political history of the country. And I think at that stage, the PPP, the government at that stage decided that this newspaper was a danger to them continuing in its office. And so there was this attempt to close us, I think, by cutting our ads, but we fought that. We internationalized the campaign. We went abroad. We took out ads in other newspapers. Wherever this Mr. Jagdeo went, he was confronted with ads in the newspaper saying, why are you withdrawing ads from Stabroek News? So we fought tooth and nail. We took on Mr. Jagdeo at the height of his powers and survived for another 20 years. I think it's a lesson to be learned for other people in the media who are facing the same thing. So I think we faced that severe threat in 2006 and 2007. What we faced here more recently is clearly political vindictiveness and so on. The fact that DPI could owe us 85 million, and to have people in government say, well, it's not only you we owe Kaiser News, we owe Guyana Times. Well, if that is how you're running your business, I don't think I want you running the country, because if you can't pay your debts for services provided, you shouldn't be running the country that way. But I do believe that there was political intent behind withholding those sums, and even up to now. And the withholding of those sums did create severe cash flow difficulties. We were, of course, quite liquid, so we could take care of our needs. But I think clearly there was an intent to to apply pressure on us in different ways, because they realized that we were continuing to do what we were doing. And I think they also calibrated that with this new party on the scene again, another party, We Invest in Nationhood, capturing 25% of the votes in 3 months. If this newspaper is around and allows everybody to have access to their pages, they may end up being a threat to us too. So I think all of that could be calibrations that came in, because everybody knew since about July last year about this enormous debt. President Ali was aware, and everybody under him. And I cannot believe that 6 or 7 months would pass and the payment is not being made if the president is aware of it. So I can only believe that it was their intention not to pay it, but we will do everything that has to be done now to retrieve
the
money.
$85 million covers what period?
That $85 million now goes all the way back to parts of April last year.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, with Stabroek News closing, do you fear that Guyana may lose in terms of independent journalism and public accountability? I know you mentioned this a bit earlier.
So I fear it. So that's one of the things I said I was very sad about. That is, with us not there, unfortunately, there won't be as much accountability. I can only hope that maybe others will arise and try to take our place. We've had a series of columnists over the years that have been entrenched in accountability. Mr. Gulsuran does an accountability column. Mr. Ram does various accountability things. We've had other columnists who have done that. And for all of our 40 years, we've been about holding people to accountability in terms of government spending and things like that. So I fear that with us not being there, that there will be less focus on that. So I can only hope that others will come up and that your program and others will sort of take up the mantle to sort of continue doing what it is you have to do, because this is really one of the hallmarks that we have brought to journalism over the period, which is holding governments accountable, and all governments need to be accountable, particularly this one, as you can see, over time, and now having come back in on a new term and with a clear majority in Parliament, I think there's even greater need now for people to hold this government accountable and to have them ensure that they subscribe to the highest standards of governance, accountability, and that they involve all of society and not try to squelch civil society and run down people who are doing independent journalism. So my hope is that they move in a different direction.
Would the newspaper be keeping its website? There's a wealth of information and data available on the website.
Yes.
Would you be digitizing entirely what would have been done over those 40 years?
So I think it's also important for the public to be aware of this. We again have paid very careful attention to our role as a repository of information. So in relation to the actual physical copy, we have two what you call bound volumes, two perfect bound volumes of all of our editions going all the way back to 1986. All right, so we have two copies of this. They're in perfect condition. One is kept in one place and one is kept in another place. So the shareholders will take the final decision on where those are going to be located, but they will be there for posterity and for people to see and research, and it's just for a final decision to be made, and then the public is going to be notified about that. We do, of course, also have a digital archives, which of course a lot of people have expressed interest in. You know, people have come from all different parts saying they'd like to purchase it and so on. But that is also there, and the shareholders will also make a decision on where that is going to be located. Obviously, some reputable institution that can maintain it, and it is, as of now, 20 years of material that will be there that's very valuable for researchers to go and find. We have also digitized every single edition of the newspaper going all the way back to 1986. That will be available on different platforms because it was stored in different places, and the public will be notified. So we will be there for future, for people for a long time from now to be able to examine what we did, and we're glad that we'll be there as a paper of record, and people will be able to go through our pages and see what we did and be able to criticize and sort of draw their own conclusions. And we're glad about that.
Mr. Persaud, finally, as you close this chapter, what message would you give to young journalists entering the profession in Guyana today, especially at a time when social media algorithms increasingly shape the news landscape?
Yeah. So if you are a serious journalist, the key thing would be you have to ensure that you're doing everything you can to get to the facts. That is, the algorithm is one problem. What has become an even bigger problem now is artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
Because artificial intelligence is taking every single thing that you think you know of and transforming it into other things. Now, you have to be smart enough to be able to see that, and you need to be able to sort of perfect your sources. You need to be able to go to 3 or 4 different sources to confirm and to assure yourself that what you think you'd like to present as fact is indeed fact. So young journalists have to understand the power and the pitfalls of artificial intelligence, and they also have to understand how the algorithmic life is working here. Algorithms are meant to favor big corporations. They're meant to favor the people who are transforming the internet and having control over it. You can't be sort of fooled by that. You have to understand how it works, and then you have to make sure that your work isn't just shaped to fit into that algorithm or what artificial intelligence is telling you. It is being shaped by facts, and is being shaped by perspective on a story that you think is important for the public, not what somebody wants you to tell, because it's important not to be constrained by the powers that be. What you're doing is pushing back against powers, and that's something that's very important. You're not going to be succumbed into that, and you're trying to tell a story on behalf of people who don't have power, and the powerless people require a different sort of arrangement and a different kind of courage to present stories for them.
Mr. Persaud, I can't end this program without asking, what's next for you?
Right. Maybe just some more vacation time, but I haven't made any decisions in the future. I would like to continue speaking as forthrightly as I do. So, I hope my voice will still be heard.
Mr. Persaud, thank you so much for joining me tonight
Yes.
on Sources, and
Yes.
all the best
Yes.
with your future endeavors.
Thank you. It was my pleasure to be here. Thank you very much, Svetlana.
And
Yes.
with that, we've come to the end of this edition of Sources. I've been your host, Svetlana Marshall.